Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock went mountain climbing. The snow drew them closer, the mountain was quiet, but the silence was heavy. It was the kind of silence that made every step sound louder, every breath feel sharper. The cold air bit against their faces as Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock walked side by side, ropes tied between them for safety. Their boots sank deep into the snow, and the weight of their gear pressed heavily on their shoulders. Yet there was something powerful about this moment. Two friends, two souls who had shared screens and laughter before, now walking into the unknown together. The climb had started as a simple idea. Keanu had suggested it weeks earlier, telling Sandra that nature had always been his teacher. "The mountain shows you who you are," he had said with his soft voice. Sandra, curious and seeking something beyond her daily routines, agreed. She thought it would just be a trip, another adventure. But as the first storm cloud rolled across the sky that morning, she felt there was more hidden in this journey than either of them expected. The first hour of the climb was filled with small talk and quiet jokes. Sandra laughed when Keanu struggled to adjust his gloves. He teased her when she slipped slightly on the icy path. They smiled, their breath forming clouds in the cold air, but underneath that laughter was an unspoken tension. The mountain was not just snow and rock. It carried weight, danger, and challenge. It was as if the peak was whispering to them, testing their courage, testing their bond. As they climbed higher, the weather shifted. The sky grew darker, and flakes of snow began to fall slowly at first, then faster, as if the mountain was warning them to turn back. Sandra stopped for a moment, looking at the endless white above and below. Her heart raced. "Keanu," she said softly, "do you think we should stop?" Her voice carried both fear and honesty. But Keanu looked back, his face calm, though his eyes carried seriousness. "Fear is real," he said, "but sometimes it shows us the way forward. We are not here to fight the mountain. We are here to walk with it." His words were steady, and she nodded, trusting him. The rope between them felt like more than a safety measure. It was like a symbol of their connection. Invisible in Hollywood, but strong here, where no cameras could reach. Every step forward meant trusting the other not to fall. Every grip of the rope meant believing that they would not let each other down. Sandra felt her chest tighten. It was not the cold. It was the realization that in this silence, in this white, endless land, she needed someone to stand with her. And Keanu was there, strong and steady. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from above. They both froze. Snow tumbled down from a ridge high above, sliding and crashing against the mountain. It was not a full avalanche, but enough to shake the ground under their feet. Sandra's legs trembled, and for a moment she thought she might fall. Keanu's hand shot out, gripping her arm firmly, holding her steady. "Breathe," he whispered, his eyes meeting hers. She did as he said, closing her eyes, drawing air deep into her lungs and letting it out slowly. When she opened them again, she saw something in his face she had not seen before. An unshakable calm, the kind born not from strength, but from kindness. The snow settled, and the mountain grew quiet again, but the air between them was different now. They no longer walked just as friends. There was a new layer of trust, a silent understanding that went deeper than words. Sandra looked at Keanu and thought of all the years, all the moments they had shared in the past, and how life had brought them here, to a mountain in the middle of a storm, tied together by more than just a rope. As they climbed higher, Sandra began to struggle. The wind pushed hard against her, her legs burned, and her breath came in short gasps. Doubts filled her mind. She thought about giving up, about asking to turn back. But every time she looked up, Keanu was there, steady, patient, waiting for her with quiet encouragement. He never rushed, never complained. Instead, he reminded her that every step mattered, even the small ones. "Strength," he said, "is not about how fast you climb. It is about not stopping." By the time they reached a narrow ledge, the storm had grown stronger. Snow swirled around them, and visibility dropped. Sandra's heart pounded as she looked at the steep drop beside her. One wrong step, and it could be the end. Her fear rose, louder than the wind. She stopped, frozen, unable to move. "I can't do it," she whispered, her voice shaking. Keanu turned, his eyes soft but firm. He stepped closer, placing his gloved hand over hers. "You can," he said. "You are stronger than you know. The mountain is only showing you the fear that was already inside. But we will face it together." His words broke through the wall of fear. With trembling legs, she moved forward, each step a fight, but each step also a victory. The rope pulled slightly as Keanu led, but it was not a forceful pull. It was gentle, like a reminder that she was not alone. The ledge seemed endless, but when they finally reached the other side, Sandra collapsed against the rock, her chest rising and falling. Keanu crouched beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. "See," he said quietly, "you faced it, and you won." Tears filled her eyes, but they were not from the cold. They were from the realization that sometimes strength is not about standing tall. It is about allowing someone to hold you when you feel weak. It is about humility, about kindness, about trust. She looked at Keanu and whispered, "Thank you." He smiled softly, shaking his head. "We thank the mountain," he said. "It teaches us both." The storm raged on, but something had shifted. They were no longer just climbers fighting against the cold. They were two souls learning something deeper about life, about friendship, about resilience. Sandra felt it in her bones. This journey was not only about reaching the top, it was about what the mountain was shaping inside them. And as the snow fell harder, hiding the path ahead, the question rose quietly in her heart. Would the mountain push them apart, or would it draw them even closer? Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock went mountain climbing. The snow drew them closer, the storm did not ease. Instead, the mountain grew harsher with every passing hour. The wind howled against their jackets, tearing at their bodies as if trying to push them back down. Snowflakes hit their faces like needles, blinding them and freezing their eyelashes. Sandra tightened the rope around her waist and followed Keanu's steps closely. Every footprint he left in the snow became her guide. Without him leading, she would have been lost in the white blur that stretched endlessly around them. They stopped under an overhanging ridge to rest, their backs pressed against the rock. The sound of the wind filled the silence, but beneath it, Sandra could hear her own doubts whispering. Her muscles screamed with exhaustion. Her fingers felt stiff inside her gloves, and her heart raced with fear. She wanted to speak, to say that maybe they should turn back. But when she looked at Keanu, she saw his calm face. His eyes were focused, steady, as though the storm outside could not touch the storm inside him. She drew strength from that calm, even when she felt none of her own. "Why do you do this?" Sandra asked suddenly, her voice trembling through the wind. "Why climb mountains when it is so dangerous?" Her words carried more than curiosity. They carried her fear, her doubts, her desperate search for meaning in this struggle. Keanu turned his head slowly, his breath clouding the air. "Because the mountain strips everything away," he answered softly. "Up here, nothing matters except who you are and who is beside you. No cameras, no noise, no masks. Only truth." His words sank deep into her, and she realized this was not about danger. It was about discovery. They pushed forward again, step by step, moving higher through the blizzard. Sandra's body shook with cold, her vision blurred. But each time she thought she might stop, Keanu's voice reached her. Sometimes he spoke only one word: breathe, or steady, or forward. Sometimes he said nothing at all, only turning back with that small, reassuring nod. And every time she moved, not because her strength was enough, but because she trusted his. Hours passed like that until they reached another ledge, wider than the last, but more exposed. Here, the wind was merciless, knocking against them with wild force. Sandra clung to the rock, her chest tight with panic. The drop below seemed endless, a dark mouth waiting to swallow her if she slipped. Her hands shook violently, and her boots slipped once on the icy surface. She gasped loudly, her body jerking. Keanu instantly leaned into the rope, anchoring her with his weight. "I've got you," he said firmly. "I won't let go." His voice was clear, unshaken, and those words carried more power than any rope ever could. The moment passed, but the fear remained heavy in her chest. Sandra pressed her forehead against the cold rock, tears stinging her eyes. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered, her voice breaking. Keanu stood close, leaning against the wind, his eyes fixed on her. You don't have to do it alone, he said. We are tied together. If you fall, I fall. If you rise, I rise. That is how we climb. His words hit her with the weight of truth, and slowly she lifted her head. She looked at him, snow clinging to his hair, his face pale from the cold, yet his spirit burning steady. Something inside her shifted. She was not just climbing for herself anymore. She was climbing for both of them. When they finally reached a small flat area sheltered by rocks, they set up a temporary camp. Keanu worked quickly, his hands skilled, his movements calm. Sandra tried to help, but her fingers shook too much and frustration built inside her. She hated feeling weak, hated slowing him down. He noticed and placed a hand on her arm. It's not weakness to need help, he said gently. It's human, and we are stronger when we carry each other. His kindness pierced through her frustration, and she nodded silently, letting him finish. As the hours passed, the storm continued to rage. They sat close together, their bodies pressed for warmth. The snow outside piled higher, the wind screaming like a wild animal. Inside their small shelter, the silence was heavy, filled with unspoken thoughts. Sandra stared at the flickering light of the small stove they carried, her mind wandering. Do you ever think about how fragile we are? She asked softly. Keanu looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. All the time, he replied. But fragility is not weakness. Glass is fragile, yet it can hold light. People are the same. We break, but we also shine. His words settled over her like a blanket, warm against the cold. She realized that this climb was not only testing her body, it was testing her spirit, her heart. The mountain was showing her who she really was when everything else was stripped away. And in that reflection she saw fear, but also courage. She saw weakness, but also resilience. And she saw a truth she had not expected. She trusted Keanu in a way she had never trusted anyone else. The night grew darker, and the storm outside showed no sign of stopping. Sandra leaned against Keanu, exhaustion pulling her eyes closed. His steady presence beside her, the rope between them, and the warmth of his quiet strength became her anchor. She whispered softly before drifting to sleep, "Thank you for not letting go." He did not answer with words. He simply stayed there, steady as the mountain itself. But even as sleep took her, one thought echoed in her heart. The higher they climbed, the harsher the tests would become, and she wondered silently if the mountain was only preparing them for a trial they had not yet seen. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock went mountain climbing. The snow drew them closer when morning came. The storm had softened, but it left behind a world buried in white. The path ahead looked erased, as if the mountain itself was daring them to find their own way. Sandra woke with stiff limbs, her body aching from the cold night. Keanu was already awake, brushing snow from their gear, his movements calm and quiet. He handed her a warm drink from the small stove, and though his face was pale, his eyes held that same unshakable calm. She felt strength in that calm, even when her own strength felt gone. They packed slowly, tightening ropes, checking their gear. The silence between them was not empty. It was full, heavy with trust built the night before. As they stepped out into the snow, the mountain revealed new dangers. The ground under their boots cracked sharply, and Sandra froze. Keanu crouched low, inspecting the snow. His voice was serious. "The layer here is thin. We move carefully." Every step after that was slower, more deliberate. Sandra's heart pounded with each crack of ice, but the rope between them reminded her she was not alone. Hours passed, and the climb grew harder. The slope steepened, forcing them to dig their axes deep into the ice. Sandra's hands shook as she lifted herself upward, every muscle screaming. Her breath turned ragged, clouding the air. She wanted to stop, to rest, but stopping meant freezing. She looked up and saw Keanu pulling himself higher with steady, powerful movements. His presence pulled her forward, like a lighthouse guiding a ship through a storm. Every time she thought about giving up, she remembered his words. "We rise together." As they reached a narrow ridge, the wind roared louder. Snow whipped against their faces, and the rope between them swung with the force of the storm. Sandra slipped once, her boot losing grip on the icy surface. Panic surged, her body jerking backward toward the drop. Keanu reacted instantly, planting his axe firmly and tightening the rope with all his strength. She dangled for a heartbeat, fear consuming her before he pulled her back up. Her chest heaved as tears streamed down her frozen cheeks. "I almost fell," she gasped. Keanu looked into her eyes, his face calm though his arms trembled from the effort. "But you didn't," he said softly, "because we hold each other." Those words stayed with her, stronger than the rope itself. The higher they went, the more the mountain stripped away. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs. The cold dug deep into their bones and exhaustion weighed heavier than their packs. Yet something else grew stronger too. The bond between them. Sandra began to notice small things she hadn't before. The way Keanu always stepped into the wind first, shielding her from the worst of it. The way he checked the rope more often than necessary, as if his only focus was keeping her safe. His kindness was not loud, not spoken with grand gestures. It was steady, quiet, like the mountain itself. And it humbled her. When they reached a plateau, the view spread wide before them. Endless snow, jagged peaks piercing the sky, and valleys buried in silence. It was breathtaking, yet terrifying. Sandra's legs shook as she sank to the ground, pulling her gloves off to rub warmth into her stiff fingers. Keanu sat beside her, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "The mountain shows us both beauty and danger," he said quietly. "Just like life." Sandra turned her head, watching him. In that moment, she realized this climb was not about reaching the top. It was about the lessons whispered in the silence. The truths uncovered when everything else was stripped away. As they sat there, resting, the silence was broken by a sound that sent chills down their spines. A low rumble deep within the mountain. Sandra's eyes widened, fear gripping her. Keanu's expression sharpened, his head turning toward the slope above. The sound grew louder, echoing like thunder. Snow began to shift high above, rolling slowly at first, then faster. Realization hit Sandra like ice. An avalanche. Her heart pounded wildly and her breath caught in her throat. Keanu grabbed her hand, his voice urgent but calm. "Run to the rocks. Now." The ground shook as the white wall thundered down, a wave of snow crashing toward them. Sandra's legs felt frozen, but Keanu pulled her forward, guiding her step by step toward the shelter of the rocks. The roar grew deafening, filling the air with terror. Every second felt endless, every step a battle against fear. She stumbled, nearly falling, but Keanu's grip never loosened. The rope stretched tight between them, binding their lives together in that desperate run. They dove behind the rocks just as the avalanche roared past, snow smashing and rolling in violent waves. Sandra clung to Keanu, her body trembling, her heart beating so hard it hurt. The world shook, the sound so loud it drowned every thought. Then, slowly, the rumble faded. The mountain grew quiet again, as if nothing had happened. But their hearts knew otherwise. They had come face to face with the mountain's raw power, and survived only because they held on to each other. Sandra buried her face into her gloves, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was so scared," she whispered, her voice shaking. Keanu's arm wrapped around her shoulders, steady and warm despite the cold. "Fear is real," he said softly, "but courage is what we choose in the middle of it. And you chose to move." His words carried no judgment, only kindness, only truth. She lifted her head slowly, looking at him, and for the first time she saw not just a friend but something deeper, a man who gave strength by simply standing steady beside her. The mountain had shown them its fury, and they had survived. But Sandra knew the climb was not over. She wondered silently what other tests awaited them higher up, and if her heart was ready for them. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock went mountain climbing. The snow drew them closer. The avalanche had left a heavy silence, almost too heavy. Snow piled high around the rocks where they had taken shelter, and the air was thick with cold mist. Sandra leaned against the stone wall, her heart still racing. her body trembling with leftover fear. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the white wave rushing toward them, endless and merciless. But then she remembered Keanu's hand pulling her forward, steady and strong, and she breathed a little easier. He had not let go. He never let go. When the mountain settled again, Keanu stood and brushed snow from his jacket. His eyes swept across the slope as though reading the mountain's mood. "We go on," he said quietly. His voice was calm, but Sandra noticed the weight behind it. He was not careless. He was aware of the risk. Still, he believed they could climb. She pulled herself up, her legs weak but her spirit unwilling to stop. "Then we go," she whispered back. The climb ahead was steeper, sharper, and colder. The wind cut harder, slicing through their jackets, testing their will. Every step felt heavier now, as though the avalanche had stolen a piece of their strength. Sandra's body ached, her fingers stiff and raw, but she refused to complain. She followed Keanu, matching his pace, letting the rhythm of their steps keep her focused. One step, then another. That was how survival worked on the mountain. Not in leaps, not in speed, but in steady, relentless movement. Hours passed, and the world grew darker as heavy clouds rolled in again. Snow began to fall, soft at first, but soon thick and blinding. Sandra's vision blurred, and the path seemed to vanish. She stumbled, her boot slipping on a patch of ice. She gasped, her body lurching, but once again the rope snapped tight. Keanu anchored himself quickly, pulling her back to balance. She clutched the rope, her breath ragged. "I keep slowing you down," she muttered, frustration in her voice. Keanu shook his head firmly, his eyes steady. "You are not slowing me," he said. "We are climbing together. Every step you take is ours. Remember that." His words carried warmth even in the freezing air. Sandra swallowed hard, blinking away the sting of tears. She wanted to believe him, and deep inside she did. The rope was not just rope. It was trust. It was respect. It was the promise that neither of them would climb alone. With that thought, she lifted her head and forced her legs to keep moving. Later, they reached a narrow pass, the path so thin it seemed carved only for one. The drop below disappeared into white mist, endless and terrifying. Sandra froze as she looked at it, her knees trembling. "I don't know if I can cross this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Keanu stepped close, his eyes gentle yet firm. "Look at me," he said. She lifted her gaze, and he held it steady. "You don't need to see the whole path. You only need to take the next step. I will lead, and you will follow. Trust me." His words settled into her heart, and though the fear did not vanish, it loosened its grip. She nodded slowly. "I trust you." He stepped forward first, planting his axe, moving with careful precision. The rope pulled gently as Sandra followed, her hands gripping tight, her breath shallow. Every step felt like walking on air, fragile and thin. Her body shook, her mind screamed, but Keanu's voice broke through the storm. "Steady, one more, breathe." Each word guided her like a light in the darkness. When they reached the other side, Sandra collapsed to her knees, her body trembling with exhaustion. Keanu knelt beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. She looked at him, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "I only did it because you were here." He gave a small smile, shaking his head gently. "You already had the strength. I only reminded you." They continued upward, but the weather grew harsher. The storm returned with fierce winds, blasting snow into their faces, forcing them to bend low and fight for every step. Sandra's strength drained quickly, her breaths short and painful. Doubts screamed in her head louder than the wind. But Keanu's presence was like an anchor, steady and unshaken. He walked into the storm first, shielding her, his body carrying the brunt of the wind. She followed close, feeling protected, feeling seen. In that storm, his quiet kindness was louder than any words. As night approached again, they found another rocky outcrop for shelter. They sat together, their bodies pressed for warmth, their breaths visible in the icy air. Sandra leaned against him, exhaustion pulling at her eyes. "Why do you never give up?" she asked softly. Keanu looked out at the storm, his expression calm but thoughtful. "Because giving up means losing the chance to see what waits at the top," he answered. "Not just the view, but the person you become when you reach it." His words struck deep, and Sandra realized that this climb was shaping her, changing her. She was not the same person who started at the bottom. The mountain was breaking her fear, and Keanu's kindness was piecing her back together. As they sat in silence, the storm howled outside, but inside the shelter there was warmth, not from fire, but from trust. Sandra closed her eyes, resting against him, and whispered before sleep took her, "I don't feel alone anymore." Keanu did not answer with words. Instead, he adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, his steady hand a quiet promise that he would not let her face the mountain by herself. But as the night deepened, the wind outside carried an eerie sound, like the voice of the mountain itself, and in that sound was a warning. Greater trials still waited above. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock went mountain climbing. The snow drew them closer. The morning came with no kindness. The storm had eased, but the air was heavy and the mountain colder than ever. Frost clung to their jackets, their ropes, even their eyelashes. Sandra opened her eyes slowly, her body stiff, every muscle aching. Keanu was already awake, quietly checking their gear. His calm routine gave her comfort, even though she could feel how hard this climb was for him too. He never said it, but she could see the weight in his shoulders, the strain in his breathing. Still, he carried it with humility, never making her feel like a burden. They set off again, higher into the silence. The path became sharper, the rocks more jagged, the air thinner. Each step stole more of their strength and breathing became a battle. Sandra struggled, gasping for air, her legs heavy like stone. She stopped suddenly, clutching her chest. "I can't," she whispered, her voice breaking. Fear filled her eyes. Keanu stepped close, his hand resting on her arm, his gaze steady. "Yes, you can," he said softly. "Breathe slower. Let the mountain set your pace. We don't fight it, we move with it." His words steadied her, and she closed her eyes, forcing herself to match his calm breaths. Slowly, the panic eased. She nodded and whispered, "Okay," and together they continued. As they climbed, the landscape grew harsher. Cliffs rose above them like walls, and below them stretched endless white valleys. The silence was so deep it pressed against their ears. Sandra's mind filled with doubts, but also with questions she had not asked before. "Why did you invite me here, Keanu?" she asked quietly, her voice carried by the wind. He paused, looking at her with thoughtful eyes. "Because I knew the mountain would show us something real," he answered. "And because I trusted you to walk this path with me." Those words struck her heart with unexpected weight. She realized this climb was not only about survival, it was about trust, about sharing something too deep for ordinary life. Hours passed, and the climb became even more dangerous. They reached a section of loose ice where every step risked breaking away into the abyss below. Sandra's boots slipped once, her body tilting dangerously. Panic flared, her hands clutching at the ice. But Keanu was there instantly, his rope tightening, his voice strong. "Hold steady. I've got you." She froze, gripping tightly, her breath rapid. Keanu leaned closer, his face calm despite the danger. "Trust me. Lean into the rope. I won't let you fall." Trembling, she did as he said. The rope held, and together they moved across step by step. When they reached solid ground, Sandra collapsed to her knees, tears falling freely. Keanu crouched beside her, his hand on her back. "See," he whispered, "the mountain cannot take what we refuse to give." She looked at him, her chest heaving, and realized his strength was not in muscle or skill. It was in kindness, in patience, in never letting fear decide the outcome. They stopped later to rest, sitting against a rock, their faces turned toward the snowy horizon. Sandra's voice broke the silence. "I was so close to falling," she whispered, "and all I could think was that I didn't want to disappear alone." Keanu turned to her, his eyes soft. "You are not alone," he said firmly. "Not here, not ever." His words pierced through her heart, filling her with warmth in the middle of the cold. She lowered her head, tears glistening in her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you." Keanu said nothing more, but his steady presence was louder than any words. As they continued upward, the weather shifted again. Clouds thickened, hiding the sky, and the light dimmed until everything seemed gray. The path narrowed into a sharp incline, forcing them to climb with axes and ropes. Sandra's arms burned with effort, her body screaming with exhaustion. She wanted to stop, but Keanu's voice guided her forward. "One more pull," he encouraged. "Just one more." Each time she listened, each time she pushed, and slowly the wall of ice gave way to higher ground. When they finally reached another ridge, the wind screamed louder than before. Snow whipped across the mountain, and visibility dropped to almost nothing. Sandra clung to the rope, her heart pounding. The storm was back, fiercer than ever. They struggled forward, their bodies bending against the wind. Suddenly, a sharp crack split the air. The ground beneath them shifted, and Sandra gasped as a section of snow collapsed, pulling her downward. The rope snapped tight, jerking Keanu forward. He dug his axe deep, holding with all his strength. Sandra dangled for a terrifying moment, her body swinging against the cliffside, her hands clawing at the ice. Fear consumed her, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Keanu!" she cried out, her voice desperate. His muscles strained, his face twisted with effort, but his voice stayed steady. "Hold on, Sandra. I won't let go." The storm howled around them. The rope stretched tight, the mountain unforgiving. In that terrifying moment, everything came down to trust. Sandra's hands trembled, her strength fading, but Keanu's voice cut through the chaos. "Look at me. You are not falling. We do this together." His eyes met hers, steady and unshaken, and she drew strength from them. With one last desperate push, she pulled herself up, Keanu lifting with all his strength until she scrambled back onto the ridge. She collapsed against him, sobbing, her body shaking uncontrollably. He held her close, his voice calm. "You are safe now. We are safe." The storm raged on, but in that moment something deeper had formed. Sandra felt it in her heart. This climb was not just breaking her fear, it was rebuilding her spirit. She looked at Keanu through tears and whispered, "I trust you with everything." His eyes softened and he nodded quietly. "Then we will reach the top together." But as the night closed in, the storm refused to rest. The mountain had tested them again, and Sandra feared the hardest trial was still waiting. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock went mountain climbing. The snow drew them closer. The storm lasted through the night. Their small shelter shook with every gust of wind, snow piling high against the walls. Sandra lay awake for hours, listening to the roar outside, her heart heavy with fear. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw herself slipping again, dangling over the cliff. The rope stretched tight. She could still hear Keanu's voice, steady in the chaos, pulling her back from the edge. That memory gave her comfort, yet it also reminded her how fragile their survival truly was. When dawn came, the storm eased. The sky turned pale gray, the air still biting cold but calmer. Keanu stepped outside first, brushing snow from his jacket. He stood silently for a long moment, scanning the mountain. Sandra followed, her legs stiff but her spirit a little stronger than the night before. The world around them looked untouched, endless white stretching in every direction. The silence was heavy again, but this time it carried a strange peace. "We keep moving," Keanu said softly, and she nodded. There was no other choice. The climb grew steeper, the air thinner. Every breath burned her lungs, and every step felt like dragging stone. Sandra struggled, stopping often to gasp for air. Her doubts returned, loud and cruel, whispering that she was not strong enough. She looked up and saw Keanu ahead, his movement steady though slower than before. He too was tired. She could see it in his shoulders, the way he paused to breathe deeply. But he never showed weakness in his spirit. Instead, he kept turning back, waiting for her, encouraging her forward with his quiet nods. His resilience humbled her. He did not climb for pride. He climbed with kindness. By midday, they reached another wall of ice, taller than anything before. It rose like a frozen fortress, smooth and dangerous. Sandra's heart sank as she stared at it. "How do we even get past this?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. Keanu studied the wall carefully, then turned to her. "We climb it together, one step at a time." His calm tone eased her panic, though doubt still gnawed at her. He planted his axe, lifted himself upward, and began the slow climb. Sandra followed, her hands shaking, her muscles burning. The wall felt endless, every move harder than the last. Her arms screamed, her body begged her to stop. "I can't," she cried softly, her voice breaking. The wind carried her words, but Keanu heard them. He looked down, his eyes steady. "You can," he said firmly. "You are stronger than you believe. Trust yourself as much as you trust me." His words lit a spark in her chest. Trembling, she lifted again, forcing her body upward, inch by inch. The climb took hours, but at last they reached the top, collapsing against the snow. Sandra lay on her back, her chest heaving, her arms numb. She stared at the pale sky, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I thought I would fall," she whispered. Keanu turned his head, lying beside her, his breath heavy. "But you didn't," he replied softly. "You kept going. That's what matters." His words carried no pride, only quiet respect. Sandra realized that was the essence of his strength. He never made the mountain about himself. It was always about the climb, about the lesson, about those who climbed beside him. As they rested, Sandra thought about her own life beyond the mountain. She thought about moments when fear had held her back, when doubt had silenced her dreams. But here, in the heart of the snow, Keanu's steady presence had shown her another truth. She was capable of more than she had ever believed. The thought filled her with both humility and courage. She turned to him, her eyes soft. "You've given me more than safety, Keanu," she said quietly. "You've given me belief." He gave a small smile, his eyes gentle. "Belief was always inside you. The mountain only reminded you." Their moment of peace did not last long. As they prepared to move again, a sound echoed through the cold air. A sharp crack, followed by the groan of shifting ice. Sandra's chest tightened, fear rushing back. Keanu's expression turned serious as he scanned the slope ahead. The ice creaked louder, echoing like thunder. "We need to move quickly," he said firmly. They began across the ridge, but the sound grew worse. Suddenly, the ground beneath them split with a violent crack. The snow gave way, and Sandra screamed as she felt the ground vanish under her boots. The rope snapped tight, jerking both of them toward the edge. Keanu drove his axe deep into the ice, straining with all his strength. Snow and ice tumbled around them, the mountain roaring with power. Sandra dangled again, her body swinging over the abyss, her hands clawing desperately at the rope. Fear gripped her chest, colder than the snow. "I can't hold," she cried out, panic in her voice. Keanu's face twisted with effort, his arms trembling, but his voice cut through the chaos. "Yes, you can. Look at me. Stay with me." His eyes locked onto hers, calm even in the storm. "We do not fall today." His words pierced her fear, and she clung tighter, forcing her body to fight. Inch by inch, Keanu pulled, his muscles screaming, until at last she scrambled back onto the ridge. She collapsed against him, sobbing, her whole body shaking. He held her tightly, whispering, "You are safe. I promised, and I keep my promises." The crack in the mountain grew quiet again, but the warning was clear. The higher they climbed, the greater the danger. Sandra buried her face into her gloves, her tears warm against the cold. She whispered through her sobs, "I don't know how much more I can take." Keanu lifted her chin gently, his eyes filled with both strength and tenderness. "You take only one step at a time," he said softly, "and I will be beside you for everyone." They sat together in silence, the mountain towering above them, its peak hidden in the clouds. Sandra's heart pounded with fear, but also with a strange determination. She knew the final test was near. The mountain was not done with them yet. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock went mountain climbing. The snow drew them closer, the peak was still hidden in the clouds, and the path ahead looked endless. The mountain had already tested them with storms, avalanches, and near falls, yet something inside Sandra whispered that the hardest part was still waiting. Her body ached, her breath burned, and every step felt like dragging through heavy chains. But when she looked at Keanu, she saw calm determination. He was tired, too, his shoulders heavy, his breaths deep, but his spirit stood unbroken. That quiet resilience gave her the strength to keep moving. They climbed higher into the thin air, where every breath felt stolen and every heartbeat echoed louder in their chests. The snow crunched softly under their boots, but the silence around them was heavier than sound. Sandra's thoughts turned inward, questions filling her mind. Why had she agreed to this climb? Was it about reaching the top? Or was it about discovering who she truly was when all the masks were stripped away? She glanced at Keanu and realized the answer was both. The mountain was shaping them, but his kindness was guiding her through it. The slope steepened again, forcing them onto their hands and knees, their axes digging into ice. Sandra's arms shook violently, her body begging to stop. Panic pressed against her chest, but then she heard Keanu's steady voice. One more pull. Just one more. She closed her eyes, focused on his words, and forced her body upward. Inch by inch, they climbed until they reached a ledge wide enough to rest. Sandra collapsed onto the snow, gasping, her tears freezing on her cheeks. "I don't know if I can finish," she whispered. Keanu sat beside her, his voice soft but firm. "You don't need to finish alone. I'm here. We are tied together for a reason." Those words filled her heart with warmth, louder than the cold, stronger than the storm. But the mountain was not done testing them. As they pushed forward again, a sudden gust of wind roared down the slope, knocking Sandra off balance. She stumbled, her body lurching toward the edge. The rope snapped tight, jerking Keanu forward. He planted his axe, grunting with effort, holding the weight of both of them. Sandra cried out, terror flooding her veins. "I'm slipping." Her voice cracked with panic. Keanu's grip tightened, his eyes fierce but calm. "You are not slipping. I've got you." She clung desperately, her body trembling, and with one final pull he hauled her back onto solid ground. They collapsed together, breathless, their faces pale. Sandra buried her face against his jacket, tears spilling. "You keep saving me," she whispered. Keanu's hand rested gently on her back. "No," he said softly. "We save each other." The final stretch came as they reached a steep ridge leading to the summit. The sky broke open above them, the storm clouds thinning to reveal pale light. Sandra's heart lifted as she saw the peak rising sharp against the horizon. It looked close, yet each step toward it felt like a lifetime. Her body screamed with exhaustion, but she refused to stop. Keanu moved beside her, steady as ever, his voice guiding her forward. Breathe, step, steady. The words became her rhythm, her heartbeat, her lifeline. At last, after hours that felt endless, they reached the top. The peak stretched wide, the world falling away on all sides. Snow sparkled in the light, and the silence was so deep it felt sacred. Sandra dropped to her knees, tears streaming freely, her chest heaving with both exhaustion and wonder. "We made it," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Keanu stood beside her, his eyes sweeping across the horizon. He did not smile with pride. He did not raise his arms in victory. Instead, he lowered himself beside her, his voice soft. "The mountain let us stand here. That is enough." His humility humbled her even more than the climb itself. They sat together on the peak. The world spread endlessly below. Sandra felt something shift inside her, a deep, quiet strength she had never known before. She realized the mountain had not only tested her, it had revealed her. She was stronger, braver, and more resilient than she had believed. And Keanu had been her anchor, not by carrying her, but by reminding her of the strength she already had. She turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, "for every step, every moment, every time you didn't let go." He looked at her with gentle eyes. "Thank the mountain," he said softly. "And thank yourself for never giving up." The wind at the peak was fierce, but inside Sandra's heart there was peace. She leaned against Keanu, her body finally resting, her spirit steady. In that silence, she understood the truth. The snow had not only drawn them closer to the top, it had drawn them closer to each other. Their bond was no longer just friendship or trust. It was something deeper, born from struggle, fear, resilience, and kindness, a bond that no storm, no mountain, no silence could break. As they began their descent, the mountain stood tall behind them, its lessons carved forever into their hearts. They had faced fear, they had faced storms, and they had faced themselves, and together they had risen.